Word on this computer. Good. All right. So here we go. We're looking at Psalm 121, and we're going to take a look at it right here. It starts at the bottom because it grows, and there are three words that kind of ascend us up. This is one of the Song of Ascents, and it's believed that either it was recited or probably sung as the pilgrims were heading up to Jerusalem, because you always go up to Jerusalem, or it was spoken or sung when you went up a flight of stairs at Herod's temple. But this predates Herod's temple considerably, so this is probably talking about the pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. So here's our psalm. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot stumble. He who watches over you will not slumber. He who watches over Israel will not slumber. He will not sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will watch to keep you from all harm, or you could translate it as all evil. He will watch over your life, or your nephesh, or your soul. The Lord will watch over your going and your coming from now to eternity. So that's the psalm that we're working with. And we got into a section talking about fear. We're moving from the fact that does the knowledge that God has set the time of your life, the length of your life, does that take off an awful lot of stress out of your life? And most of you said, well, yeah, it does, but it doesn't remove the stress of how I'm going to leave this world, which is talking about fear or anxiety. So we kind of are getting ourselves into fear number one of a two-parter. And we just kind of brought up the fact that, if you watch horror movies on a Saturday afternoon, it might be fun. You might be one of those people that find horror movies a little bit of a relaxation, but the danger isn't real. The threat is not imminent, but it's not fun to be afraid in the very real sense, in the real world sense. So we had a little fill-in on your handout that fear is an emotion that is produced by a sense of danger. But here's the key: real or perceived. And it's the perceived that we're going to be getting into. We tried to get into last week. We're just going to redo it here this morning. Fear is so powerful that it can literally change the physical body. It can change your state of mind, and it can block the thought process and make us do things that are totally wonky and illogical. So you want to be, these are just kind of some high signs to cue you up so that fear is not driving you, so that you are driving the situation around you under the blessing and guidance of Christ and his word. So we got into the first fear that set this whole spinning ball, third planet from the sun, into a terrible fall into sin. Fear is the first emotion that Adam and Eve presented after the fall into sin. Adam admitted to God, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. And then God, of course, says, who told you that you were naked? So the first question that we had was, fear causes us to do what? And the answer to that question was, fear causes us to run from a problem, fight or flight. Most of us are hardwired to flee away from the problem rather than seek a solution. I went out for a walk last Sunday morning, and as I was looking down on the sidewalk, I passed Lori and Rick's house, which is just a few houses down from ours. And I noticed something was kind of on the front lawn, but I wasn't quite sure what, so I stopped and I looked back. I was already past this skunk, this giant skunk, the size of an overgrown raccoon in Rick and Lori's house. And when it saw that I stopped, immediately it raised its tail and it was starting to turn towards me, but I did not move towards it. it fled, and I fled in the direction that I had originally been heading. I was not going to fight with a skunk on a Sunday morning. No way I was going to get to Loblaws and get 14 gallons of tomato juice to be able to rectify that problem. So animals, human beings, we're kind of hardwired to flee. Fighting for a situation and holding your ground comes from training. When you think of soldiers, when you think of police officers, it's just repeated training that allows them to overcome their emotions. And that's really what some of these tools are that clinical counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists try to give people who suffer from anxiety. So the big question that we've got in front of us is, when will we stop being afraid? And the solution that I would pretend is passage from 1 John 4 is one of many that we could kind of hold before our eyes here this morning. But perfect love drives out fear. So we're going to get into it here. Anxiety. We're going to start with anxiety, because anxiety leads to fear, and fear leads to emotions, and emotions leads to behavior. So a feeling of worry or nervousness or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. High school students, overachieving grade school students, often feel anxiety when they want to do well on a test. That does not mean that they have clinical anxiety. That's just they're revved up to want to do well on their test, and they're getting a little anxious because they don't know about the outcome of whether their results are going to be in proportion to their effort and the investment of their time. But clinical anxiety is similar, but it is a nervous disorder that is characterized by a state of excessive uneasiness and apprehension, typically with compulsive behavior or panic attacks. And you don't want to self-diagnose this. If you think that something's up with you, then it's time to go see your doctor. Or if you don't want to go see your doctor, then you need to come to one of your pastors, and you have to agree to let you talk to one of our WLCFS counselors over basically and essentially a Zoom or a FaceTime type video setup like we have today. But you don't want to let this go and let it drive your life. You want to take control of this and deal with it. Okay, so we're going to start with anxiety. And anxiety basically has three parts. Anxiety usually starts with our thoughts and the way we think about an event. Thinking traps are faulty thinking that create emotions like fear. And we're going to look at those thinking traps. We verbally went through them last week, but I think it's important that you actually see the words and let these things sink in. The emotions then create actions that usually reinforce the faulty thinking. And then you have this vicious cycle that has begun. We want to figure out a way to break the cycle. That's the goal here. So you want to attack the thinking. It will no longer fuel the emotions that is leading to the fear, which is leading to the behaviors. You want to attack the emotions so that it won't fuel the behaviors. And you might want to enlist a spouse or a friend to help you do that as well. Then you attack the behaviors to stop reinforcing this whole cycle. And the key here is that you change anything in this cycle and it will break the thing to pieces. That's the whole goal, all right? So it takes practice. It's not gonna work. You didn't learn how to ride a bike the first time you hopped on two wheels. You had training wheels. So you need to be gentle with yourself and kind of work the system here. So we're going to take a look at 9 common thinking traps. Most clinical counselors group these basically the same. And what you're going to notice is that there are similarities between some of them, but with slight nuancial differences, just so that the patient, or so that you, or so that I can relate to this particular thinking trap that I have a propensity for. So let's get into them. The first 2 are fortune telling and mind reading. These are very similar to one another. Fortune telling is when we predict that things will turn out badly, but in reality, since you cannot predict the future, You don't have a crystal ball. You don't really know. So why don't we just take a wait and see attitude instead of jumping to the conclusion that I know I'm going to mess up or I'll never be able to manage my anxiety. Never is a pretty strong word. My mom is known for a lot of Carol Lee-isms, one of which was hate is an awfully strong word. We use an awful lot of really strong words to describe in hyperbolic form how we're feeling about things. But this is just not a blow-off. This is, if you've got clinical anxiety, you might get to the conclusion where you're perfectly convinced that you will totally mess up. You always mess up, that you will never be able to get a control of your anxiety. It's simply not true. Mind reading is very similar to fortune telling, except it's when it brings in fortune telling into the realm of your interaction with other people. So mind reading is a trap happens when we believe that we know what others are thinking. We think we know what others are thinking, and we assume that they are thinking, what, the best of us? No, we assume that they're thinking the absolute worst about us. The problem is that no one can read minds. Again, you don't have a crystal ball. You are not Spock in the TV series Star Trek, where you can put 3 fingers up to the side of someone's head and be able to read their minds. So you don't really know what other people are thinking until they actually verbalize it. So mind reading is going to manifest itself with people saying things like, others think that I'm stupid, others think that I'm a klutz, others think that I'm ugly, others think that I'm not pretty, she doesn't like me, things like comments like that, observations like that. So you've got the graphic up there. Fortune telling is kind of the arrow, and the mind reading would be the coming to a false conclusion. 2 + 2 = 5. Or, almost a wrong correlation between cause and effect is another mistake that we make. It's a variation on mind reading. So the third mind trap, thinking trap, that we have a possibility of falling into is this black and white thinking. This is when we only look at situations in terms of extremes, absolute extremes. There's no middle ground. There's no gray area whatsoever. For example, things are either good or they're bad. They're great or they're absolutely terrible. They're a success or they're a failure. In reality, though, most events call for a more moderate explanation. For example, cheating once on your diet does not mean that you have totally failed. You've had a small setback. All you need to do is get back on your diet tomorrow and get back on with it. This is probably one of the biggest challenges of people who start out on a diet and or exercise regimen. They think that they want to get themselves back in shape, and they set a goal for themselves that I'm going to do 10 kilometers today, and they end up getting a walloping 4 or 5 kilometers in, and pretty soon they keep hitting that 4 or 5 kilometer wall, and they finally just give up because they haven't reached their goal. Keep the goal, right? Just be persistent. Hang in there. When I started walking 5-6 years ago, because my daughter had thrown the gauntlet down at my feet, saying that she was not going to the top of Mount Katahdin with an old man that was out of shape. She would go up to the mountain with the father that went on the Pacific Crest Trail. So get yourself back in shape. There's a very shallow incline on Marlow, right around in our neighborhood, right around the corner. And it's probably a walloping 2-degree, 3-degree incline at one point. And I remember early on, my ankles were so out of shape that they were just aching. And I was out of breath by the time I got to this 2 or 3 degree incline. You just need to hang in there, and you just need to keep conquering that incline over and over and over again until you build up your muscles. The point is that not that Pastor Goetzinger is so great that he overcame his achy ankles and was able to dominate the walking scene. The point is for you that if you're suffering from anxiety in any one of these thinking traps, you got to keep working through it. You got to be persistent. You got to hang in there, and when you need help, you have to reach out for help. So what does black and white thinking look like? Anything less than perfect is a total and absolute abject failure. Simply not true. The truth of the matter is that we have our greatest life lessons through failure. It's as simple as that. And you know the old proverbial urban legend story about Edison, and he was trying to come up with the incandescent light bulb. He went through thousands of materials in order to find a filament that would simply not burn up, and it would turn to energy. You take the energy and turn it to a visible glow rather than just blow up the glass or just fizzle out. It was persistence that got Edison to produce that light bulb. If he had had this idea of perfection every single time, he would have been a total and abject. Then he would have been a total and abject failure. But he hung in there. I planned to eat only healthy foods, but I had a piece of chocolate cake. Well, chocolate cake for me would be wasted calories, but a chocolate chip cookie, that would be or pecan pie. Now my diet is completely ruined. Simply not true. So we have two more that are very similar to each other. And Pastor Thompson used filtering, I think it was in yesterday's or maybe it was Friday's video devotion. Overgeneralization and filtering. Overgeneralization is when we use words like always or never to describe situations or events. This type of thinking is not helpful because it does not take all situations or events into account. For example, sometimes we make mistakes, but we don't always make mistakes. And examples of overgeneralization or hyperbolic speaking or drama, I always make mistakes, or I always mess up, or I'm never good at public speaking. So filtering is basically the graphic that you see with all the pluses and then the one big minus sign up near the top of the screen. Filtering happens when we only pay attention to the bad things that happen, but we ignore the series of events that are what we would call good things. This prevents us from looking at all aspects of a situation and drawing a more balanced conclusion. So believing that you did a poor job on a presentation because some people looked bored, even though a number of people were interested, and you received several compliments on how well you did, you would totally filter out all that positive because you weren't perfect in your own mind, because you didn't hold in rapt attention every single person that was in that room. Guess what? You're simply not going to hold everyone's rapt attention when you speak. But that does not mean that you are a failure. So that's filtering. Just looking at, you have a series of positive events that are happening in your life, and then one negative thing happens and it overshadows everything else. Thinking trap to avoid. Labeling is when we talk to ourselves in mean ways and we use single negative word to describe ourselves. This kind of thinking is unhelpful, and it's really, you're being unfair to yourself. You are too complex of an individual or being to be summed up in a single word. So you say, I'm stupid, or I'm a loser, or I'm ugly, or I'm fat. You might be overweight, but fat is a different connotation. But you are not stupid, you are not a loser. So labeling is by no stretch of the imagination helpful in any way, shape, or form. And what all of this does is it is focusing on your self-esteem, which should really be focused on the Christ esteem that he has given you as a redeemed child of Christ, right? You are a child of God. That is huge in his eyes. And he wants it to be huge in your eyes. And the devil uses these thinking traps to chip away at that knowledge that you have, that Christ esteem that the Holy Spirit has put in you at baptism and has fed in your psyche and in your soul and your mind through use of the means of grace through all these years of your life. So I think these are our last two, overestimating danger and catastrophizing. Again, these two are very similar to one another, but overestimating danger, I'm just going to faint, I'm going to go crazy, I'm dying, or I'm going to die. This is when we believe that something that is highly unlikely to happen is actually right around the corner. It's not hard to see how this type of thinking can maintain and feed your anxiety. For example, how can you not feel scared if you think you're going to have a heart attack at any time? Especially if you have no precondition for having a heart attack or whatever medical situation. Catastrophizing is very similar to overestimating danger. This is when we imagine that the worst possible thing is about to happen, and we predict that we won't be able to cope with the outcome. But the imagined worst case scenario usually never happens, and even if it did, we are most likely able to cope with it. The examples of that is I'm going to freak out and no one will help me, or I'm going to make such a fool of myself, everyone will laugh at me, and I won't be able to survive the embarrassment. Well, that first sentence, if we put this back into a Christian context, because this is obviously in a medical context, which does not invalidate the truth of it by any stretch of the imagination. But we predict that we won't be able to cope with the outcome. Well, you do have a promise from the Lord that he will either take you out from underneath the burden or the calamity that you're experiencing, or he will find a way out for you, right? But you see, if you're in this thinking trap, your brain is not thinking logically and clearly. And if it's not thinking logically and clearly, your ability to be able to recall or call back to mind these scriptural truths is probably going to have to come from outside of you. That's why you're encouraged to reach out when you start having these feelings, because you need to be reminded of these truths from God, that he's not going to leave you or forsake you. He's not going to leave you hanging out there suffering and stranded, but he wants you to know and be assured that he does have your back and he is working all things for your eternal good. So, all right. Should statements or dramatic hyperbolic statements. Should statements is when you tell yourself how you should or must or ought to feel and behave. However, this is not how you actually feel or behave. The result is that you are constantly anxious and you are disappointed with yourself and or with others around you. So I should never feel anxious. I must control my feelings. I should never make mistakes. So ought, should, must statements are just simply not helpful at all. So I'm trying to read our chats if I can while. Yes, that's my go-to. Okay, good. I'll try to keep an eye on those chats. All right, so those are our common thinking traps. So again, let's go back to why we want to be made aware of these things. We attack the thinking of the thinking trap. So if you're not aware that you're doing this, that's one thing. But now you've been made aware that these are possibilities. So you attack this kind of thinking and it will no longer fuel your emotions. You attack the emotions so that it will no longer fuel the behaviors, and you attack the behaviors to stop reinforcing this entire cycle. And once again, you change anything in this conveniently three-part cycle and it's going to break the whole thing to pieces, and it's going to bring you back into a more normal state of emotional well-being and human cognitive behavior. So, all right, does anyone have any observations or comments at this point? A good passage.
Pastor?
Go right
It's
ahead.
Rose.
Hi, Rose.
Hi, folks. I'm just saying from my own personal experiences, I think sometimes anxiety attacks are fears of the unrealistic or the unknown. And I'm going to give you an example. I was in Mexico with a girlfriend and we were stopped by the Mexican police with 4 people around us, and I don't speak that much Spanish. I didn't have an anxiety attack, but if I got to work and thought I had sent the wrong email or did reply all when I shouldn't have, I would have a complete meltdown. So I think a lot of times it's the unrealistic that gets you, not the realistic.
Yeah, we mentioned, thank you for that, Rose. We mentioned that up at the beginning, that it can be this imminent fear of something that is very unlikely to happen to you. But I'm hearing your story, and I think you just maintain my my old statement of just don't go to Mexico for holiday, because then you don't have 5 Mexican police officers surrounding your car. But I'm glad you weren't anxious about that. I think I would have been a bit anxious about that. But thank you for your observation, because it usually is it can be based on real, but it also can be based upon imagined fallout. So Psalm 55 is a good passage to kind of tuck away for yourself. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. There's a good passage from Psalm 37:5, commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. That's a good psalm that we're probably going to bring in the next series of Psalm 27 I'm working on right now, which is a psalm that's going to move us from anxiety and fear and emotions to what do the Psalms have to say about courage, and where does that courage come from? So cast all your anxiety on him from 1 Peter, because he cares for you, very similar to the previous psalm passage. So these are just some good passages to kind of just jot down for yourself. And so anxiety, replace with healthy responses. And some of those healthy responses I just supplied for you. Knowing about the thinking traps, knowing that anxiety is going to fuel the emotions, and the emotions is going to fuel the thinking, and the thinking is going to fuel the behaviors. And we want to try to break that cycle at any point. You might think that this sounds very 1960s hippie era type self-medication to say use calm breathing. But the truth of the matter is that when Apple puts on their Apple Watch a breathing app that will get you to breathe for 1 minute in a constant state and concentrated state, because it'll help you focus. There is medical evidence to that effect that it really does work. So relaxation techniques, there's a plethora of them. I'm just throwing that out there, that if you need to research that or you need some help researching that, you need to reach out. But also, in addition to all of the healthy responses that we just looked at, one of many healthy responses, knowing about the cycle and how to break it in the thinking traps. We're going to take a look at kind of a second part of all of this. And we're going to kind of look at this.
Pastor?
Yes?
Noella here.
Go ahead, Noella.
I've used that calm breathing technique when many nights I suffer from insomnia. I know some of us on the Zoom do too. And what I do is lying in my bed, place my hand on my belly and fill up that belly with as much air as I can. And I recite, "Be still and know that I am Lord."
Good. That's a good technique. Thanks for sharing that. That's good. So we're going to look at a second part now of this. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. When will we stop being afraid? And we are going to take a look at my help comes from the Lord from this standpoint. And this is from an excerpt from a little bit of an essay from one of the clinical counselors from WLCFS, Wisconsin Lutheran Child and Family Services. And I think it was from one of their pastoral advisors. I'm pretty sure it was from Pastor Fry. But what he wrote was the Father's perfect love pushed back fear. It didn't remove the consequences of sin, but it provided Adam and Eve a way to press on and overcome. God's love is perfect love because it is complete love. It is love that finds fulfillment in promises made and kept. Perfect love in Christ pushes back against fearful despair or defiance. The Lord is not saying, get with it, or start proving you love me and I'll love you back. He is simply calling us to use what we have been given. There again, this reinforcement that our God is a means of grace God. He I shouldn't say rarely, but in the great history of the church, the great history of the world, he has rarely intervened in a supernatural way. He tends to use the means that are built into his world already. So he's calling us to use what we have been given. The Holy Spirit, who transformed us by the perfect love of Christ, has left a rich deposit of his love in our own hearts. That unio mystica, the mystic union. And the more we give it away, the more we receive anew from the Spirit of God. And it's that giving away part that we're going to be focusing on here. Pastor Fry continues, we don't save ourselves, conform our hearts, transform our hostile minds, climb up to God's level, or earn his love. God acts first. He first pushed back fear by demonstrating his perfect love in the redemptive work of his Son, Jesus Christ. The perfect love of Jesus is deliberate and intentional in its desire to sacrifice, self-sacrifice. That is the nature of Christ. That is the essence of his love, which is why it casts out fear. Fear leads to self-preservation. Fear is always based on the unknown. The unknown factors these days are many. Will I have enough money? Will I have enough toilet paper? Will there be an economy left by the summer? Will my child graduate? Will I lose my job? And in order to combat fear, it makes sense that we self-preserve. We stockpile, we push and shove, we shake our fists, we road rage, we wag our tongues and spew foul language. We lash out before someone lashes at us. We complain about the decisions our leaders make. We gripe about the lines at the store or the gas pump. We label people as kooks or crooks. That's fear. That's survival of the fittest, but that's not love. Jesus' love finds its fulfillment, its perfection and completion in self-sacrifice. The perfect love of Christ finds its fulfillment in the hope to be a benefit to someone else. We find peace in Christ, who meets us in our fears with his love and gives us a real reason for courage and hope. Fear not, for I have overcome the world, he promises in John 16. And so we rise up to meet fear with courage, anger with kindness, and anxiety with calm. What that means is we respect our government, we demonstrate Christian love to our fellow citizens, we practice good health, we strive to take advantage of new opportunities for worship and study. Coronavirus is not the only thing that is contagious. Fear is contagious, but so is love. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a little bit deeper look at this using that chart that is on your handout. And you were able to visually see it last week in front of you. But here it is once again up on the screen. And the big question in all of this is, who do I want to be during COVID-19? And so you've got this fear zone, and then you have a learning zone, and you have a growth zone. And the fear zone, we kind of ran through some of the traits of that fear zone, but it's basically self-preservation going on right there. You are hunkering down and you are fleeing from the fight, and you are just going to self-preserve to the best of your ability. So the question that I asked you to kind of think about last week without the visuals, all these visuals in front of you, is where on this spectrum are you now? If you're in the fear zone, do you want to be in the learning zone? And if you want to be in the learning zone, how are you going to get there? And the learning zone is getting your eyes off of yourself. I start to give up what I can't control. It is a total waste of energy. I don't mean to insult anyone, but it's a total waste of energy to fret and stress about things that you have absolutely no control over. And that really is both a mind trap that needs to be worked on, but it's also a spiritual trap that needs to be worked on as well. Because if your God has sent his son into this world to live, die, and rise again in order to preserve you, do you actually think that he's going to allow something dumb to take you out, or to harm you, or some calamity to come into your life that is not for your eternal benefit, right? This is a trust factor in our God. So if we trust him to give us our daily bread, it is a learning process to learn to trust him for our life and our spiritual needs and our emotional needs as well. So in that learning zone, you need to learn to identify your emotions. That's really an important thing. And guys, I can't encourage you enough to kind of, tap into your inner feminine. We don't like to do it, but it's necessary. I stopped compulsively consuming what hurts me, from food to news. That's moving you into the learning zone. You do not have to follow every single COVID story that comes through your Apple News feed. The highlights for the day is probably enough, if that, right? I become aware of the situation and think how to react to it or act upon it. I evaluate information before spreading something false. There's an awful lot of false news out there right now. And you want to identify the sources where you're getting your news. Learning zone is also, I recognize that we're all trying to do our best. Or the learning zone can also be, I recognize that most of us are trying to do our best, but there's still some folks that are still very selfish and they really don't give a rip, right? They're not going to social distance. They just don't care. They're not going to necessarily respect what our government has asked us to do. And what does Jesus encourage you to do with your enemies, right? Your enemies. Keep burning coals on their head, to love them, to be patient with them. So that's the learning zone. The growth zone is, I think of others and see how to help them. Now this is starting. Perfect love drives out fear. This is where we're moving from self-preservation and staring at navel gazing at yourself and getting your eyes up and not only seeing the cross of Calvary or Golgotha out there in the distance, but I'm also seeing both my brothers and sisters in Christ, but I'm also seeing fellow citizens of Ottawa that I can possibly be of some assistance to, just to get my eyes off of myself and demonstrating that perfect love of Christ that was shown to me to others. I make my talents available to those who need them. I live in the present and focus on the future. I am empathetic with myself and with others. I thank and I appreciate others. I keep a happy emotional state and spread hope. Positive mental thinking, the power of positive thinking, from Norman Vincent Peale, kind of spiraled out of control as almost, turned into a couple cults in the late 60s, early 70s, through the 70s. But there is some science behind what Norman Vincent Peale was actually trying to promote as far as a positive, happy, emotional state and view of the world. And as Christians, we probably should have, well, not probably, we should have the most positive outlook on life that a human being possibly can have on this side of heaven, because we have the triune God covering our back. And we have the triune God's promises out in front. And we have his guardian angels surrounding us on all sides. So how much better does it get than that? I look for a way to adapt to new changes, and I practice quietude, patience, relationships, and creativity. So I'm just asking you to think this through. Now, anyone who wants to kick in with an observation at this point, please do. But I really would love you to just figure out where you are at on this three-part spectrum, because COVID is going to decompress to a degree, and we're going to go back to a somewhat normal way of life. And a lot of this that we have learned through this process of how to deal with life during COVID times are some skills and abilities and techniques and worldviews, Christian worldviews, that I pray we actually keep with us as we move into whatever life is going to look like going into the future. So where are you on this fear zone, learning zone, growth zone? Where would you like to be on this spectrum? And then how in the world are you going to get yourself there? So you need to come up with a plan of how you're going to move from one zone to the next. And I think it's pretty obvious.
Pastor?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So, as I mentioned last week, it's Lena, the isolation that at my stage in life has really, really thrown me back on myself. And as we progressed through it, I find when I look at this, schematic here, that
Yes.
I can identify myself as being at any one of those stages at a given time as I go through the day and the week. And, for example, yesterday, not to take up too much time, I went to the drugstore, but then I ended up kind of taking the train. Taking the train now is almost like a normal. And then I made a point at each stop. I was so happy when I was waiting to actually chat with one of the red vests about how they were doing. Like, I really needed to do that to check in with them. But, I'm still dealing with the fear. I'm able to do compassion. I'm working on learning. So that it's like the problem with that is at this point, there's like a groundlessness now, which I find is challenging. So we can be at any one of those points, and that's really challenging. I think you, as you were wrapping up your comment, kind of gave an insight as to what's a really useful thing to hang on to, and that is the Trinity, because the Trinity in itself is a mystery, and it's a moving mystery as you contemplate the Holy Spirit, Christ, God, what those things all represent in our lives. So that would be my observation.
Thank you, Lena. And I think you bring up another good point that I was going to bring up, and I kind of almost whisked right past it. But you said you're dealing with this groundlessness that has kind of permeated your life right now. One of the ways, there are a couple of ways you can attack it, but real quickly, one of the ways that you can attack this groundless feeling that you have is write down what it is pre-COVID that made you feel grounded. Identify what those things are. You probably know them off the top of your head, but I would encourage you to write them down on the left side of the sheet. And on the right side of the sheet, what can you do now to give you some semblance of being grounded again, not being listless or a ship at sea with a sail that's hanging empty because there's no wind, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And if you need help with that, talk to your friends. It might be nothing more than you just have to fire up FaceTime on your Apple device or Skype on your PC device, or use the free Zoom account, set up a free Zoom account, which you're limited, I think, to 40 minutes or something like that. And you just have a daily chat with one of your children to bring back some of that, or your coworkers, just to kind of touch base. And, you're not a world unto yourself. So, but I would encourage you to do that. What made your life feel grounded before, and what can we do now in these COVID times to replace or bring some semblance of groundedness back? And the Trinity is a powerful one. What we're missing is the actual physical fellowship of worshiping together, but we have the virtual, and we're missing our Lord's Supper. but we have the power of the word in the lessons and the truth of God's salvation buried into the liturgy. And we have that truth of redemption being proclaimed, law and gospel being proclaimed in the Sunday sermon. And so for a time, we just live without the Lord's Supper, and we hunger for it even more. But that's a groundedness right there, that as soon as they start loosening up the restrictions on how many can gather, Pastor Thompson and I are ready to jump on that one as soon as we ethically and legally and morally can, with the guidance of our government. So, final
Well,
slide.
thank you for that. Yeah, if I could just little addendum that, and as I said to my son last Christmas, the two of the big things that ground me, I said, no matter what state I'm in, I can always sing in church and get on a plane. And those are the things I've lost.
Yeah.
So singing in church, that has always been something that just gives me that feeling of spiritual connection. So that has been hard. So I just want to push in and make sure, as you're, if we start assembling, that I'm on that list of first people who can get in that church.
Okay. All right. I don't think we're going to do a lottery for money, but we'll make sure that you're high on that list, Lena. So we will definitely do that. The last slide that kind of wraps this up is also from Pastor Fry. Of course, I changed it from if Americans to if Canadians are caught in a web of needs and fears, let's push back with the perfect love of Christ. The Lord is still in control. His word is still effective. His love is perfect and all sufficient. Bask in the promises by staying in the word. Unleash the power of the Holy Spirit by putting your faith into action. Let's be the ones who step up in love and are ready to explain why we need not fear. We have perfect love. We have the Holy Spirit, and that means you've got it in you. Let's push back the fear. So that is that little essay, and perfect love drives out fear section. Taking it one step further beyond anxiety. So I'm going to get us into the rest of the psalm. Does anyone have any observations that they wanted to make at this point in Bible class with about 11 minutes left?
Hi, Pastor. It's Rose. I agree with what Lena said. I think we move through those different phases depending on the day. But the thing that's been getting me, that I don't know why it took me so long in life to learn this. So a couple of things. Right now, you're seeing all these people that have done these amazing things. Somebody told me the other day that they had a friend that did an MBA while under lockdown. And I'm thinking, oh, great, I made my bed and I could barely make muffins one day. But so the takeaway from devotions this week I had to remember is live your life as if you're strangers. And the other thing is our ultimate goal in life is not to make a mark on the world. And I think we sometimes get caught up in that during these times as well. So that's my short comment.
Thank you, Rose. Yeah, maybe not make a mark on the world in the classic worldly sense, but I think, if we just had the encouragement of perfect love drives out fear and not navel gazing, to reach out beyond ourselves, that's making a mark on the world for Christ, with Christ and for Christ, for the benefit of other people. I guess I'm just adding that little tweak. I know what you mean by our goal is not to make a mark on the world, but in many ways, as a member of the communion of saints, we are called to make a mark on the world, right? So, Christ,
we're called to share our faith.
Pardon?
I understand. Yeah, we are called to share our faith, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have to, do an MBA, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I know. And I don't have to climb Mount Everest anymore at this point in my life. I can be perfectly happy with the Adirondacks. No, I hear you. I know what you're saying. So thanks. Verses 3 and 4 of our Psalm 121, he will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Just a couple of observations about this verse. He will not let your foot be moved. By switching now, the psalmist is switching to the second person. He's actually now not just preaching to himself or expressing his own thoughts and feelings, but he's now applying his experience also to his readers. So as we've seen often in the past, the psalmist will turn into pastor, counselor, preacher in all of this. So he will not. The believer is on their way, the way which God has pointed out to them. You ask God to be preserved from faltering, and here is the assurance that your prayer is heard. God grants help and strength, and he is the one who clears the way. So he will not let your foot be moved. There are two negatives in Hebrew, and we're going to get it's language nerdy moment now, language geek time now. This is all. It's an immediate prohibition, and immediate prohibition is don't do it now. This is the immediate prohibition that moms use with their sons who are picking on their sisters. Stop doing that. And what I mean, what mom means by that is that's an immediate prohibition. Stop doing that now. So he will not now in the immediate time let your foot be moved. That's a comfort right there. We're going to look at the long-term negative prohibition coming up here. Just a reminder, without faith, it is impossible to please God from Hebrews chapter 11, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So here is the assurance that your prayer is heard. And this Hebrews is just a related passage that God, how this works, God knows everything, but he does not listen to, meaning he does not heed and act upon the prayers of unbelievers, is why this passage is here. And that's what Hebrews teaches us at that point. Anyway, still on this, notice how the rest of the psalm now becomes this ascending promise for help. And it's each verse adds to the blessing. And this is not unique of just Psalm 121. Many psalms above and beyond the psalms of ascent also have this kind of ascending or building idea in them. Just the very nature of a psalm. You have a verse, but you'll usually have two what are called shticks as actually technically how it's pronounced. And you have the first half of the verse making a statement about transgressions, for example. And the second part of the verse is going to build on that idea, but it uses a synonym, so iniquities, right? And psalms by nature are built to build upon one another like that. So this one just happens to use three words that kind of bring you higher and higher up. So he who keeps you will not slumber. Well, someone asked me, well, what's the difference between slumber and sleep? Well, all right, slumber might not have any REM sleep in it. It's maybe a nap in the afternoon. It's not a real deep sleep. It's a lighter sleep. But what this passage is pointing to for us, rather than defining slumber or sleep, God's just having the psalmist cover the extremes, right? And we're going to take a look at some of those extremes coming up here. But God is much concerned about his own. His eyes are trained on them, not just observing them, trained on them, like a mom does on her toddler in the park near a busy path where bikes go. She's got her eye set on that toddler. God's got his eye set on you as well. God is not a tired old grandpa who changes between waking and napping, like the graphic on the right. The Lord is not a God who is on duty only at certain times. So he is on call and on duty 24/7. So That keep word, shamar, it means to keep or to watch or to preserve, and you could really plug in any one of those. He who keeps you will not slumber. This is the ESV translation. He who watches you is maybe a little bit more remote, and if I were the editor, I probably would not use the translation of watch, because that seems a little bit more distant. That doesn't seem to convey the idea of God's eyes are trained on you. Preserve would be a good translation as one. He who preserves you will not slumber. So, go back. This is from 1 Kings 18, just a little reminder about Elijah and the sleeping gods of Baal. And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself." Oh, Elijah, that was nasty. "Or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened." So our God is not a God that needs to be awakened. He is awake and observant all the time, which should be a great comfort for anyone who hears that truth and who's listening to this Bible class. We continue on this idea of he who keeps you will not slumber. Just to clarify, although psalms of complaint sometimes cry out to the Lord to awake, the Lord is never really asleep, and we know that. He is the untiring God who is watching over his people at all times. So this behold word is kind of cool. Hene is how you say it in Hebrew. Hene, behold, also can be translated indeed, or surely, or yes. Those are all good translations of it. But I had a question for you on this verse. What does this little verb communicate? Behold, it basically, well, I'll give you a second to answer if you want to. We're down to a minute anyway. We could close out with this. What does that word behold communicate?
Hi, Pastor, it's Marion. For me, behold means pay attention, listen up, or it's a boast or the confidence that it gives you. He's looking after us. It's a, pay attention to this and look out. He's there.
Good. Yeah, that would be my answer as well. This is really, when you come across this behold, whether it's in the Old Testament or the New Testament, whether it's hene in Hebrew or Allah in Greek, it's like stop, pay attention, and focus in and beat in on this truth. So absolutely, it conveys this confidence that the psalmist has in the Lord. So you focus in, and then you're focusing in, and what is it focusing in and telling you? He who keeps Israel, folks, is never going to slumber, and he's never going to sleep, right? That's the comfort that we have here. So, all right, I'm going to stop right there. We can finish up with the rest of Behold, Listen Up next week, and we can then wrap this up. And then I should have most of Psalm 37 and its related verses ready for us at that point. So are there any closing comments or observations that anybody would like to make at this point before I let it loose for you to have fellowship with one another? Okay.
Pastor,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say thanks for the study, and I think it's good to give people give us the tools to identify, and it's quite human to be fearful, and it's quite human to have anxiety, and to have the first of all, as I say, to be able to identify what's causing it, and know that you're not unique. We're all in this together, as we know, and we're all dealing with these very human emotions.
Thank you for that, Bev. Good observations. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else want to make a comment or observation before we say ciao? All right. With that, have blessed worship this morning, and we will see you in a half an hour on the live stream. And I will leave this up and running so that any of those of you who would like to unmute and turn on your camera and fellowship with each other, go right ahead. So I will see you later. I'm going to go get ready for worship.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thanks, Pastor.
Thanks, Pastor.
Hi, Rose. So good to hear you.